Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Here at Mahfil, the Shia National Community of Middlesex, SICM, has organized lectures, discussions and debates on Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Bahrain, as well as Israel and Palestine, and a host of other issues. Today, as part of our interaction with the key foreign affairs affecting our community, we have a debate on what's really behind the Syrian uprising. On the one hand, we have Mark Bergfeld. He is part of the NUS and is a member of the Central Committee of the Socialist Workers' Party. In January 2011, it was announced that he'd be standing for the NUS presidency as part of a united left slate. He's contributed to the Socialist Worker, the Socialist Review, and International Socialism. He has been on TV and radio on numerous occasions, including ITV's Daybreak, Press TV's Big Story, the BBC's The One Show, Channel 4 News, and BBC Radio 5 Live. He's also been profiled in the Evening Standard, the Daily Telegraph, the Guardian, and various other international press, such as the Figaro and El País. Wikipedia. He holds a degree in philosophy, politics and economics, and a master's in sociology from the University of Essex. On the other side, we have Sukan Chandan. He's a London-based political analyst and a commentator since the late 1990s. He's previously edited and published the magazine on Hamas and Hezbollah in 2006. He was the managing editor of Conflicts Forum, Cultures of Resistance publication in 2008, amongst many other publications. He appears regularly on Press TV and Russia Today on matters pertaining to the Global South and communities of the Global South and the West. So the format of today's session is as follows. We'll start with 5 to 7 minutes from each party to set out their positions. And following that, we'll have 3 minutes for rebuttal from each side. Following the rebuttal, we'll have a chance to have interaction with the audience. And we're lucky today to have people from all different parts of the globe, people who are students of politics, international relations, as well as concerned citizens who care about the foreign affairs of the world. Finally, we'll have about 3 minutes for closing arguments. And normally, right now, I'd ask you to switch off your mobile phones, but today I'm going to ask you to do the opposite. If anyone is able to tweet on the left and the right, you can see we have a Twitter full which shows the tweets. Use the hashtag SICM, SICM. So without further ado, let's start with Sukant.
Thanks, brother, and thank you for inviting me this evening. And I hope you'll be as thankful for inviting me after my talk as you've been kind to invite me. And you know, in our community, when especially our elders speak, and I would like to, apart from obviously thanking God, I'd like to thank my ancestors and our ancestors for their sacrifice and struggles for bringing us to where we are today. And also I'd like to thank our great-great-great-grandchildren for I hope that our sacrifices today will uplift them in the future. You know what it's like in our community when you ask, especially our elders, a question, especially when it's to do with politics or history. We start back at least a century ago, and it ends up being, you know, quite some several hours long speech. And obviously, I've only got less than 7 minutes now to speak. But I would like to ask a rhetorical question, and I suppose my basic position will be informed by this: which powers was it? Not too long ago, before any of us were born, but which powers was it which colonized and partitioned Sham, Balad al-Sham, which is the land that we know today, which has been partitioned into Jordan, Syria, Palestine, and Lebanon. It was partitioned by two gentlemen, one called Mr. Picot, representing the French government and state, and another one called Mr. Sykes, representing the British government and state. In 1916, the British and French got together and had an agreement called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which led to the borders that we see now in the Levant area or the Sham area of the Middle East region. And the only reason we know about this treaty, the Sykes-Picot Treaty, was because after the Russians or the Soviets had their revolution in 1917, the leader of the revolution, Lenin, decided to make public all the secret treaties which were being held by the former ruler of Russia, the Tsar. So he made public this agreement. So if he hadn't made this agreement public, we may not have known to the full extent of the conspiracy against the people and the land of this particular region. And it's still the same powers today, with the addition of the Americans, the United States, more correctly called, which are behind all the problems, I would say, of the region, and frankly, are the root problems of all the problems that we face as communities throughout the world, especially in the so-called third world or the global south or the so-called developing world, etc. So really, the roots to most conflicts in the world, in the global south, are actually down to the Europeans, who have artificially constructed these states more often than not. So if you see the problems in Iraq, actually the problems in Iraq can be actually rooted to how the British especially constructed those borders of that nation state today that we consider Iraq. Now coming back to more recent times. How long have I got left?
You have 3 minutes left.
Okay, that's not too bad. So coming back to more recent times, what we had, and I'm going to start really in the late 90s with the second half of the introductory kind of contribution. Now, the struggle for all nations of the global south, from which nearly all of us come from, is independence, and independence which will help us develop our economies and the strength of our culture and industry and education system, etc. This is a struggle that most of the countries of the third world are still engaged today. But because of US hegemony, because of the military aggression of the Western powers, they still haven't let us be as of yet. So if it's sanctions, if it's plans for regime change, if it's just open warfare, the Western powers are still, I would argue, the main obstacles to true independence and development and freedom of our countries today. And this is the struggle that the people of the Middle East region have been and are involved in. Two very important things happened in the year 2000. After a general lull in the struggle of the peoples of the region to independence, especially after the collapse of the Eastern Bloc, two big things happened in the year 2000. One was the victory of the Lebanese Islamic resistance against the Israeli occupation of that land in 2000, and just a few months followed by the eruption of the second, or Al-Aqsa Intifada, of the Palestinian people. And these two events really catapulted the freedom struggle of the people of the region. And what followed from that was a succession of victories of the independence movements or the liberation struggles. And most notably was in 2006, when the Lebanese Islamic resistance, Hezbollah, made the historical achievement of being the only Arab armed entity or force able to defeat the Zionist aggression. And the Palestinian resistance followed that. Then 2006, as I mentioned, it was the victory of the Lebanese forces. And what happened, and I know I've only got a minute left, I might go over just a few seconds if you don't mind. And what happened after that, really, was that the Western powers felt it necessary to put in place certain mechanisms to roll back that which was defeating them in the region. I was in Tehran about 3 years ago, and having read the politics of the region, and clearly in Tehran, it was very clear for me to feel and to listen that the alliance of forces led by the Iranian Islamic State, in alliance with Assad's Syria, with Lebanese Hezbollah and the Palestinian revolutionaries, were very confident that US hegemony and Western hegemony will be defeated in the not too distant future. So really, and I'm going to just finish by here, and it's really, I haven't got enough time to go into that, but perhaps in the discussion and coming back to Mark and everyone else, we'll go into this. But really, what we're seeing now in Syria is an alliance of interest, mainly by the NATO countries, in alliance with, unfortunately, the Turkish government, who seems to have turned their back on the interests of the region and gone for their own narrow interests, in alliance with the most backward, medievalist, the real obstacles to true freedom, which is bolstered by the British and the Americans, it's the Gulf monarchies. This alliance of interests are intervening in Syria to overthrow Syria as the last remaining Arab state, which will defend the interests of the Arabs vis-a-vis the West. So that is my broad brushstroke analysis of the situation.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now introduce Mark to give his part.
I would like to thank Mohammed and everyone at the Assembly Hall for inviting me today. It is an honor and privilege to be speaking. Is it on? Yeah. To be speaking here in front of you today on this Friday evening. The way that I actually wanted to start is to say that I fundamentally oppose any Western intervention in the Middle East or in any other country of the global South at this moment in time. And the reason why I oppose any foreign intervention in Syria as well is the fact that foreign intervention always bolsters the British regimes, bolsters the forces of imperialism, and ultimately, in my own capacity as a socialist, I believe that ultimately we need to weaken the regimes, the British regime as well as the Western regimes, because of the role that they have played time and time again, as Sukkant has outlined, in ruling and dividing and conquering people, but as well is in waging a war upon the very own people here, whether it is waging a war upon Muslims through the use of Islamophobia, or whether it is waging a war through the cuts in public services that they're doing at the time. But the real thing that I want to be speaking about is in terms of three things. First of all, the nature of the Syrian revolt, really quickly, then the nature of the Assad regime, and then thirdly address the question of Palestinian liberation, which is at the heart of the question that we're debating here today. The first thing is that the world has fundamentally changed on the 11th of February 2011 when the Egyptians overthrew Mubarak. Because before that, we had an axis of resistance. We had an axis of resistance between Syria, Hezbollah, and Iran. On the 11th of February, what changed was suddenly that in the Middle East and North Africa, we had an axis of revolution from Bahrain to Yemen to Syria to Libya to Tunisia, and most fundamentally Egypt, the strongest populated and with the strongest working class in the region. A few weeks later, on the 13th of March 2011, a few school children in Dera, in the province of Syria, started to scrawl the exact same slogans that they had heard on Al Jazeera throughout the Egyptian revolution onto the walls. The people demand the fall of the regime. And because they were tortured by the Assad regime, they were tortured. Effectively, what it meant is that their mothers and their older siblings took it to the street in revolt. What happened is that the Assad regime used live ammunition upon these protesters who were not calling for the fall of the regime, but who were calling for the implementation of the reforms. One demonstration led to another, and effectively what we saw was starting the demands being raised for the fall of the Assad regime. And why is that? The nature of the Assad regime is not one of protecting the interests of ordinary Syrians. In 2000, the so-called Damascus Spring, effectively what happened is that when Bashar al-Assad came into power, what happened is that he promised political liberalization and economic liberalization. The political liberalization never materialized. The economic liberalization has meant poverty, inequality for the vast majority of Syrian people, whether you're Druze, whether you're Christian, whether you're Shia, whether you're Sunni in Syria. In 2000, people living at the poverty line in Syria itself lies at 10%. Today, in 2011, it lies at 33%. And we've had a massive drought in Syria at the moment with many landless farmers, etc., coming through. And so the same question that lies at heart of the entire world is the division of the oppressed and the oppressors. And the problem is that the Bashar al-Assad regime is on the side of the oppressors, and the people rising up in the cities of Aleppo, Idlib, Damascus, and Dera are the oppressed. And fundamentally, it is the same kind of revolution that we are seeing, that we have witnessed in Egypt. The third question relies on the side of the question of Palestine. And the thing is that ultimately, the Bashar al-Assad regime has been always labeled anti-imperialist and has by many people been labeled the last line of defense against Western powers. But we aren't allowed to forget the very fact that in 1967, when Israel won against the Arab world and took the Golan Heights, effectively Assad's father at the time and his uncle and the same regime actually took a back step and actually used its power then later on in 76 against the Lebanese resistance movement and against the Palestinians when there literally was a revolutionary situation. It didn't protect the Palestinians. Again, what we see is today 500,000 Palestinian refugees inside of Syria are helping and are part of the same kind of revolution, and that is why it is called the Damascus Intifada. And so we cannot rest our hopes into Assad. We need to lay our hopes into the people that are fighting back, into the ordinary millions of people who are taking it to the streets at this moment in time. We always need to stand with the oppressed in order to make sure that this world becomes a better place for our grandchildren, for our children's children, etc. And the Syrian people are far more pro-Palestinian than Assad will ever be or has ever been, because his regime is not a regime based upon the success of an anti-imperialist movement or of a national liberation struggle, but is ultimately born out of a defeat of a failed project, of a failed anti-colonial project. And now we have an opportunity, the Syrian people have an opportunity to make their vision of what their society should look like an actual reality. And that society and those people are crying for social justice, equality, and ultimately a revolution which can transform the situation across the region.
Thank you very much. I think we'll now have a 3-minute chance to rebut the opening statement. 3 minutes.
I think there's a number of points. I mean, I could speak for hours in response to that. But I'm going to pick up on just several points. First of all, Al Jazeera. I don't know if Al Jazeera has any credibility with people in this room. I would encourage you to not give it any credibility whatsoever. It has become even more oversimplified and partisan, and frankly has lost all sense of professionalism, even compared to the Saudi channels. Frankly, it's just the mouthpiece of the Qatari monarchy. So if you want to, go along with the interest of the Qatari monarchy in the region, please, keep tuned in to Al Jazeera. Second point is the nature of the Syrian rebellion. It's fractured and it's divided, and Mark hasn't gone into that, and I'm sure Mark's aware of that anyway. Time doesn't permit perhaps Mark to go into that. But the leadership and the main thrust of the Syrian so-called revolutionaries, who I call counter-revolutionaries, or perhaps anti-Shia and anti-Christian armed gangs, because that's exactly what the main thrust of the Syrian Free Army, so-called, is very disconcerting, and that's a gross understatement, obviously. Listen, what's going on in Syria is very plain. It's a movement to prepare for intervention against Lebanon to overthrow the power of the Lebanese Hezbollah movement, because the greatest threat right now in our historical period that we're living through to the Zionist state and Western interest remains on a non-state level is Lebanese Hezbollah, and on a state level is Assad Syria and the Islamic State of Iran. And I don't say that by being any particular enamored friend of Assad or Ahmadinejad or Ayatollah Khamenei necessarily, right? So really what's going on is a movement to stop that liberation movement. Mark said there is no successful anti-colonial struggle in the region. I would completely disagree and say there is, the vanguard of which is Hezbollah, the Palestinian resistance and revolution, obviously, backed up by the Syrian and Iranian regimes. Has the Syrian regime signed any peace treaties with the Zionist state? No. Has Assad Syria forsaken any of the Palestinian revolutionary groups? No. Yeah. So this is what's really going on. And again, I emphasize, this is a movement of the most chauvinistic elements of a Sunni ascendancy in alliance with the Gulf monarchies, that it's coming for the resistance movement in Lebanon. Just the last point, I was in Libya 3 times last year, in Tripoli, while NATO was conducting its cowardly bombing campaign from thousands of feet up in the air. You don't have to like Gaddafi, but what Gaddafi said about what will happen if NATO achieved its aims exactly is what's happening. Libya has turned into completely horrific, anarchistic rule of all kinds of militias. The country is breaking up, and the country is split up in all kinds of fiefdoms allied to different tribal groups. And this is what's coming for Syria, and worse is coming for Syria.
Thank you very much. Mark, 3 minutes.
Yeah. Just quickly to respond to 3 points. The first one is about the nature of the movement that is happening there, and where I think we can talk about that. The second one is about the part that Hezbollah plays inside of the Arab Spring and the revolutions. And thirdly, I need to address the question of Palestinian liberation once again. The first thing is, of course, every movement is heterogeneous in the sense that there are different forces involved in the revolution in Syria. There's, on the one hand, there's the SNC, the Syrian National Council, which has nothing in common with the Syrian people whatsoever, and effectively is calling for Western intervention and is a group of exiles. But at the same time, there are also local coordination committees, and those local coordination committees are present on the ground. They're made up of ordinary men and women, Syrian people who are struggling for their daily bread and butter, and they have called, in response to the attacks by the Assad regime, they have called for dignity strikes, which you have seen spread across 14 different towns and cities, and have ultimately really called student demonstrations and various other acts, which have been supported by millions of people inside of Syria. The third force is the Free Syrian Army, which Sukant, I believe, calls the Contras, or the counter-revolutionaries. But ultimately, we need to say these aren't some kind of stooges that are just representing the interest of whatever state. Because if you claim that, you're actually saying the Syrian people do not have a mind of their own. The Syrian people have no kind of political agency and you end up being a defender of conspiracy theories. Ultimately, the Free Syrian Army is drawn from the vast amount of poor people that exist inside of Syria. And as you can very clearly and have very clearly seen in the news, that there have been Christian army generals which have defected and mutinied over to the Free Syrian Army, and there have been other from other religious minorities inside of Syria. The last thing is, Hezbollah in the south has won in 2006 against Israel, and victory be granted to them. And their resistance, we must say, is part of the same revolution that we're seeing there. There's no kind of dichotomy between the aims and objectives of the Syrian people, because ultimately their interests are diametrically opposed to those of imperialism. In 2006, when thousands of Lebanese refugees had to find homes, the people in Syria opened up their doors, and it is these same people in Syria today that are fighting against the Bashar al-Assad regime. And ultimately, one day we will see that those two movements will converge in one revolutionary struggle.
Thank you very much. We've had quite a lot of tweets going on, and many of you have been able to read them. So I just thought I'd say a couple of them from here. Some of them are quite interesting. Okay, so we've got some saying, Al Jazeera is not that great. Long live Press TV. Ironic. Another one saying the exact opposite. Al Jazeera is the greatest shaitan's younger brother. Okay. Syria is just an excuse to eradicate Hezbollah. Please. Sorry. Yeah, clearly. Big difference. And maybe this whole thing is about breaking Iran's regional power. Okay, so let's go to the audience. I'll just a reminder of what the main topic of the debate is. It's what's really behind the Syrian uprising. So if anyone in the audience would like to make a point, please put your hand up, and someone there will give you. Let's start on the right-hand side, right in the corner, on the third row. All right.
Grateful for the speakers and for the audience. Very briefly, there's a saying in Arabic, you know a person by the company he keeps. And if we look at the struggle in Syria, the people who are like leading it, or they are the spokespeople for it, are now accompanied by the likes of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and of course America and the likes. So although I agree completely that the Syrian people deserve a better record of human rights and economic like reforms or well-being, but what's going on is not going to end to that result. It's not going to lead to prosperity. It's going to lead to civil war and complete destruction of the infrastructure. So I would ask the speakers to put some suggestions or some like ideas on what's the best way of giving an independent and positive like constructive contribution from the independent masses of Muslim people like the audience here.
Let's just have a couple more comments and then we'll come back to the... anyone else? Yep.
Hi, I had a comment really about the Free Syrian Army. You know, so I think you mentioned that it's sort of a black or white, you know, the opposition against the leadership. But there's been a lot of discussion about the Free Syrian Army being very fractious, and we don't even know what the Free Syrian Army is, where they're from, their identity, where their base is, what their funding is. I was just doing some reading recently, and I found out that the Free Syrian Army has bases along the border of Turkey. You know, what does that mean? So, you know, unfortunately, the way TV is that you get a very black or white picture of what's happening.
Assalamu alaikum. Very quickly, I think it's very important to kind of follow up on the point the sister said, and you know, identify the FSA and also the countries in the region. From the earliest days, Turkey has played a very active role in this uprising, setting up camps way before this uprising even began to take place. So the question is, who was preparing this? Who was planning this? Furthermore, I think it's safe to say that when you have the GCC, which is currently occupying Bahrain and murdering people there, one of whom is a relative of our brother Tahir Adel, she was killed last night. And for these people to then lecture other governments in the country about democracy is a bit rich. Furthermore, for these countries, for example, like Turkey, now we see that there are reports coming out accepted. Libyan rebels are training Syrian rebels in Turkey on the border. So while we shouldn't make this black and white and say that everybody in Assad's army is good and clean and everybody in the rebels is bad, I have a very simple philosophy when it comes to politics. If Saudi Arabia and Israel are on one side, I'm on the other side. So we have to really hit that home.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll read a couple of tweets out and then give the panel a chance to answer. One of them is, so Syrian people deserve no sympathy or support because Qatar supports them? And I'll do just that one. Okay, let's start with
Yeah, just to straight off go on that point. Listen, in every single country in the world, people have legitimate grievances. You can point to your favorite country, your favorite government in the world, and I can assure you, people in the communities in that country have absolute legitimate grievances. And so when it comes to the last tweet or the comment about no sympathy for the people of Syria, absolutely I have sympathy for the people of Syria. Now, from the opposition side, that doesn't mean I accept anyone else who is using their legitimate grievance for perfidious aims. And that is always a danger. Now, I think Mark mentioned before something about how somehow he thinks the opposition in Syria, the regime change forces in Syria, will somehow become more powerful than the Turkish state, than the Saudi state, than all the other Gulf states, will become more powerful than the Zionist state. Listen, the Zionist state has come out in support of regime change and the opposition forces in Syria. There was a really interesting article in the Financial Times, and the Financial Times is not for people like me and you to read, right? The Financial Times is written for the financial elite of Britain, for the financial elite for Britain to read. So in that sense, they kind of let on some truths than they would otherwise do in the rest of the mass media. That's the rest of the trash in the mass media is for us to kind of absorb. But the Financial Times quoted all kinds of leadership of the Zionist state, in which they said categorically, we were first a bit concerned, yeah, maybe some jihadi so-called elements will come in and, but actually, this is nearly a word-for-word quote, taking things in total, we are happy with the regime change conducted by the forces at play in Syria. So the absolute enemies of the Syrian people are involved in regime change. So yes, I have sympathy. And if those people that Mark sympathizes with so much in Syria are really concerned for their state, they would unite with any forces in Syria, including the government army, to chuck out those agents, those armed terrorist agents sent by the Gulfies under the umbrella of NATO. That's what I would do. I'm sure that's what some people here would do. I would never tolerate these people coming into my country under the auspices of NATO and Zionism to overthrow my country. That's what the people of Syria should be doing.
Mark?
Look, the Saudis and the Qataris, Hillary Clinton, etc., and Sarkozy call themselves friends of Syria, but we know what they're involved in. They're occupying Bahrain, they've smashed the Yemeni revolution, etc. And with friends like, there's the old saying, with friends like these, who needs enemies, right? Effectively, the Saudis and the Qataris are the enemies of the Syrian people as well. I want to address a question that the gentleman raised over there, of what kind of independent kind of action do we need? And there was a very important step inside of the Syrian revolt which needs to be explained, which was namely the students in Aleppo who started the uprising, who after the children in Dera had started the uprising, effectively tried to build relationship with richer merchants. What it was a strategic mistake to try to do so, because the richer merchants had really an interest in maintaining the Assad regime. However, what happened then is that they effectively started building links with the organized working class. And unlike in Libya, where there hadn't been a working class movement, no trade union infrastructure, etc., there is a mass working class which has come from the land, etc., and which has started to organize with older left-wing activists. And this kind of independent action, which has led to the dignity strikes and the local coordination committees, has actually pointed to a way of taking immediate power away from the Bashar al-Assad regime and placing it into the hands of the Syrian people themselves. And these Syrian people who went on strike, those students who marched in Aleppo, are no agents of the Turkish state, are no agents of the Qatari state, etc. The other thing is, with the Free Syrian Army, is that there is no centralized command. That sometimes they just spring up, and it isn't just true to say that Turkey is financing them, etc. If you look at their weapons, if you look at their guns, if you look at their YouTube videos, these are downtrodden people rising up with the least means that they have at their disposal. And not only are they based in Turkey, they're also based in Lebanon and are getting weapons from Lebanon. That's why prices of rocket launchers at the moment in Lebanon have skyrocketed, because they're being sold to the FSA.
Thank you very much. Any others from the audience? Let's go from the middle and then on the right-hand side. Sorry. To the middle.
I'm sorry if I sound naive on this issue, but I don't think we can really understand the situation, and I'm more worried about Mark than you. You have hinted to it, you understand. I'm just wondering, does Mark understand the fundamentals of Shiism and Sunnism in this context and where the issue is? There are extremes in both sides. An extreme Shia will never want to kill the other side.
That's right.
There are groups of Sunnis who truly believe, and a rising number in this world, that it is commendable or recommended to kill a Shia. This fundamental different understanding, Mark, is very important for you to really understand just the root of this conflict. If a large community within the Arab world who are rich with petrodollars, who have got that belief, and if they are funding whatever the issues are, including influencing the Western powers and Europe and America for their own dollar interests, then this fundamental understanding is very important for you.
Yes, I'm Syrian and I'm involved in what's going on in Syria and the Syrian revolution. And this is why I probably could help the audience giving a couple of points about what's happening from someone who's really involved. First of all, I mean, when we started talking about the subject, we started with a historical background and talking about SICM and other things, as if the Syrian people don't exist, so as if it's only a struggle of nations for interest. And there's 23 million people that's called the Syrian nation that, it hasn't been talked about much. And in this context, we heard the comments about the resistance and Iran and Syria as the resistance front of this part of the world. And I agree with Mark here that the same Syrian people that stood with Hezbollah and Iran and Bashar al-Assad against Israel are the same people who are going to the street. So it's actually the same principle, because when we stood by Bashar al-Assad and Hezbollah, we stood against oppression and against the humiliation of the Palestinian and the Lebanese people. And now the Syrian people are being humiliated, and the same people are standing by the revolution because it supports them. We were actually shocked to see that forces like Hezbollah, like Iran, like all the revolutionary countries like Cuba, like Venezuela are standing actually with the tyrants, where they should have stood with the people. They are the same kind of tyrants that they actually rebelled against many years ago. Now, going to this subject, even if we put it as a given, so now we're saying that it's a given that the people of the region have to fight America and Israel, and I'm clarifying that the people of Syria are actually against America and Israel. Against America and Israel when it comes to oppressing people. We're not against America as in general. We're not against the American people. We're against the American policies that actually affect us. So even if we take this for granted and we say we're against it, there's also another argument that it's actually the will and the interest of the people, of the Syrian people, that decides our political position. So we don't have to please other nation. We don't have to stand by default against America, for example. And if we're not against America, then you stand against us, and we deserve to be killed and imprisoned because we're Americans and we're with the Qataris and Saudis. Even if the Syrian people decide to be with Saudi and Qatar and America, they have the right to be respected. And they can't be genocided like this just because they're friends with Qatar or Turkey. If our interests happen to match the American interests and the Qatari interests, we will take them because we don't want to be slaughtered by this tyrant. And this is our right. Now, one last important point is that all this debate about Sunni and Shia has nothing to do with the Syrian revolution. The Syrian revolution is the revolution of the people that has Christians, that has Druze, and we never talked about it. A lot of the Syrian people from all sects, when the revolution of Hezbollah happened, all of us, just to be proud of Hezbollah, we used to say we're Shia, just because we were so proud of the movement. People didn't care. This is a revolution of the people, and when we start entering the issue of Shia and Sunni, this is very, very dangerous, because now you're creating this big divide within the Islamic nation, and it's really uncalled for. No one in the Syrian revolution till today, although it doesn't have a unified front, as you say, because it's a genuine revolution. Genuine revolution don't start with a leadership and a council, and then they become a revolution. Although it doesn't have a leadership, I bet anyone to tell me any sectarian call of the revolution talking about Shias or anything. Plus, if you want to just talk facts, besides our beliefs about Shia and Sunni, if you want to talk facts, there's actually not many, there's less than 1% Shia in Syria. So who are we talking about? Alawites? This is what we're talking about? everybody knows that the Alawite regime, the Alawite sect is dominating the government, and the people rebelling against the government happens to be Alawites. We didn't choose that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
If we could have one more comment. Let's start in the front here.
Cheers. I think it's just important if you look at what's been happening over the past 2 years. You have, this mass kind of economic crisis, gripping the world from, here to all the way in the Middle East, South Asian countries. Last month you had 100 million workers in India on strike against, their paying conditions and the increasing hardship of life, just the struggle every day that they're facing. And actually, if you look back and see kind of what's triggered this, we can see actually at the heart of it was actually people in Tunisia, the Mohammed Azizi, who couldn't sell his vegetables because he didn't have a license. So the authority said that he couldn't sell it, and then he immolated himself, set himself on fire. And what happened was this caused mass protests, caused outrage. Man is basically trying to sell his vegetables just to stay alive. And this is a kind of common story across the Middle East now, that you have economic crisis where here they're bailing out banks to the tunes of billions, and then over in the Middle East what they're doing is you have people like Mubarak and Ben Ali and Assad taking as much money as you can. You see, when the Egyptian revolution happened, after they burned down the NDP the headquarters building and they went to Mubarak's house, what did they find? They found a 16-car garage with sports cars, then he had mansions, swimming pools, and then you had in the ordinary streets people who couldn't even afford to eat. So if we have to look at the kind of economic reasons for this change, and actually what's happened is this kind of current is spreading, and as you see from Tunisia to Egypt, now you have Syria, Yemen, Bahrain, all of these other countries, these people have tasted what it is to feel empowered and to feel like, actually, when we all come together as a collective in our millions and our tens of millions, actually we can make a change and we can make a society that is geared towards our interests and not the interests of the rich in our country. That's why I think it's quite important that as much as what happens if these debates like this isn't an issue between Shia and Sunni. Actually, you look in Egypt, what happened when they were in Tahrir Square, you had the tens of thousands of Muslims praying, and what happened was the Coptic Christians formed a ring around all of these Muslims praying, so that the army couldn't come and shoot them with sniper rifles and tear gas them and everything. And here you see in when it comes to the pinnacle, crucial point of these struggles, that when you have these all different groups in societies, whether it's the women, it's the different religious groups, everyone comes together. Actually, you can defeat this kind of divide and rule tactics that the government plays. And actually, you see groups like NATO and America coming in to try and stall these revolutionary process. But what we have to say is no to intervention, but also yes to the revolution. Is a very fine kind of balance to get.
Thank you very much. Let's try and keep comments to 2 to 3 minutes at the maximum. A couple of tweets. There've been quite a few going on right now. Let me try and read ones which aren't, which are readable. Okay, there was one which said, the Salafis and the Free Syrian Army are scary, but that's why we need to support the people to ensure the uprising is not hijacked. And another one which says, a question to the panel, I think. What are the pro-Assad protests about? So I guess that's to Mark. Okay. Mark, what are the pro-Assad protests about?
The question of the pro-Assad demonstration is, we need to ask ourselves a simple question: why don't the security forces, if demonstrations are banned, shoot at the pro-Assad demonstrations? That should answer your question right there. The other thing that I want to talk about is quickly is a popular uprising doesn't need a justification, and ultimately it isn't simply good enough to say the Bashar al-Assad regime is anti-imperialist, or you're either, or as Sukant does, you're either with us or against us, and that kind of thing. Because what it lacks is kind of not even the imagination, but it lacks kind of the credibility that the Syrian people are able to express themselves in a popular manner, as the Egyptians have done, as the people of Lebanon have done, as well as actually it undermines the very fact that the Arab people can strive for democracy. The future of the revolution is not going to be decided inside of Qatar or Washington. It's not going to be decided by Al Jazeera. It's going to be decided by the millions of people of Syria who have started to taste freedom and rid themselves of the shackles of oppression. And oppression is the key word, because when we're talking about the revolt in Syria, we need to remember that one of the first chants on the demonstrations was the Syrian people are one hand. And that was Christians, that was Sunni, that was Shia struggling together and demonstrating together. The problem of sectarianism arises due to the sectarian nature of the regime itself. The regime itself is based on sectarianism, and that is why you have sectarianism starting to erupt. But the answer lies, as I said before, with the millions of people who are struggling in the street, because the fundamental division again is between the oppressor and the oppressed. 9,000 people have been killed so far, and the Syrian people are yet to stop demonstrating, are yet to stop striking, are yet to stop fighting back. They have showed immense determination, and they will only stop once victory comes.
Thank you. Sukan?
Mark, you say that the course of the developments in Syria will not be decided by Qatar or Al Jazeera, etc. Listen, having studied Libya quite forensically for a good part of a year, you know, I can't say I don't mind because who am I to say I don't mind if a people have a civil war? But it would be fairer in Libya if NATO didn't get involved and killed 50,000 people and bombed people from miles above in the air. It would be a fairer struggle if the Qataris weren't involved and sending their mercenaries and special forces into Libya to fight for their side. It would be fair if all the NATO countries weren't doing that. It would be fair if Saudi wasn't doing that. It would be fairer if Turkey wasn't doing that. Similarly in Syria, if the Syrian people want to have a bit of a to and fro and a bit of a battle about the course of history of the political status quo, let them have it without outside interference. Mark, you said yourself that with friends like this for what you call the Syrian revolution, who needs enemies? So even you are saying that the Syrian revolution has enemies of NATO, of the Zionist state and the Gulfies and Turkey. So why aren't you prioritizing that the Syrian revolution gets rid of these interests, and then, no, you haven't actually said that. No, so that's the priority, is it, of the struggle in Syria, to get rid of all the, what you call imperialist, Gulfi and Turkish, that's the priority, right? No. Bashar Assad is not a foreign intervention in Syria. He's the president of the Syrian state. So would you, as priority for the Syrian revolution, say the priority for the people in Syria is to get rid of this outside interference? The last point, very briefly, I forgot to mention, and I feel slightly ashamed that I have, this is all to do about the lead up to the war in Iran, which will be happening relatively soon. This is the wider context, which, to my shame, I didn't mention until now, and Mark hasn't mentioned at all. This is about weakening all the allies of Iran in the region so the attack on Iran will happen smoother than what they wish. But because of China and Russia just said no, you know, back in the 80s, there was this advertising campaign about drugs, just say no. Well, China and Russia just said no, and how healthy it was for the situation, not just for Syria, but for everyone else. They said, West, you can't just roll on regime change on any given country that you like. We respect sovereignty, and we will defend sovereignty and the international order.
I'll give you 1 minute to respond, given it was about that.
Yeah. Look,
as priority.
The thing is that there are two fundamental different approaches to the question, because Sukant believes that first you have to supposedly get rid of all the outside influences, and then you can take on the issue of social justice. The question of imperialism and social justice are intrinsically linked in the way that societies are structured. In society of the global south, as well as the global north, there are divisions between rich and poor, and it is an uprising of the poor. And so to say the poor should first, kick out all of this, kick out all of these foreign. Yes, you did say. No, you said the main priority is. Sorry, you did say that. Yeah, so, anyways, okay. You said no. Let me finish. So to say, like, you first need to struggle for an anti-imperialist struggle, and then you can take on the questions of divisions within our own society, is fundamentally a flawed one and has been proven to be flawed time and time again.
Okay, one minute response, and then we'll go to the audience.
No, it's just frankly, it's just a nonsense, isn't it? To see the thing with Mark, he comes from a political school of thought, which is living in, frankly, it's descended between.
I'm open about my political school
It's descended between heaven and earth, because you're neither here nor there. You're talking about this amorphous, kind of meaningless concepts of social justice. Look at the concrete real politic of what forces are at play. Right? When there's armed gangs who want to lynch, in the Syrian context, Shia or Christians, that's a real issue that's going on in the here and now. In Libya, they've been lynching blacks en masse. But unfortunately, Mark's closest comrades and political colleagues think the NATO bombing and regime change in Libya was somehow something
and
to be
Mohammed
celebrated.
Gaddafi never
on the
lynched
day,
anyone.
On the day Gaddafi got lynched, and you don't have to be a friend of Gaddafi, but frankly, I think
you are a friend of Gaddafi.
I am a friend of Gaddafi, yes, and I make no apology about that, and we can go into that, and I'm happy to go into that very thoroughly if you so wish. But now's not the time and place.
15 seconds.
15 seconds. But the day Gaddafi got lynched, now what you say about Gaddafi, he chucked out the American military base in Libya in 1969, which is the biggest military base in the whole region at the time. He chucked out the SAS and the British base. And the day he was lynched, your organization said that it was a day to be celebrated like the day Mussolini was hanged. What a disgusting thing to say, because who was it that colonized Libya before? It was Mussolini. So to put Mussolini on on the same level as Gaddafi is, frankly, when you say, I don't understand issues of social justice, you obviously don't understand the mechanisms and the real issues of liberation of the countries of the global south.
Okay. Let's go to the audience for a few points, and then we'll come back to Mark. Okay, Mustafa at the back there.
Okay. What we are forgetting here is we are forgetting justice here. We all know that Assad is a dictator. Whatever the reasons are of people revolting against it, we should support the revolutionists here, because we are fighting for justice here. What I understand Qataris, and I also understand the imperialists want, whatever the reasons they want to overthrow or get rid of Assad is because they want to get into Iran. These are factors, yes, affecting. But we all know that Assad is a dictator, and he has the social justice and human rights of his countries are terrible. Yes, so it's Saudi monarchy, yes. I'm not saying Saudi monarchy. Yes, the Saudi monarchy should be overthrown too. I agree with that. Yeah, Saudi monarchy should be overthrown too. But here we are talking about Syria's debate. We're not talking about Saudi Arabia's debate.
Let's. If anyone wants to speak, can they please put their hand up, and they'll get a chance to speak in a second. Continue. Sorry,
I think we, as Muslims, we should look at justice here. What is justice?
Okay, let's go to someone else in the audience.
I think Mustafa's just made the point. I'm just saying that it's interesting. I think both of you come from extreme points. You're completely ignoring the rights of the Syrian people that are revolting. And it's really, and you're coming from a point that it's all about, freedom for the Syrian people. The problem lies in the fact we can see the problem in Egypt. Or everybody's, singing and dancing about the Arab Spring. But we know the issues when there is a power vacuum, when you haven't got appropriate leadership. So there are a lot of issues, and perhaps to completely say we shouldn't be backing the revolutionaries, I think is unfair, because from the justice point of view, as human beings, we should be on the side of people that are being oppressed, and we know that Assad needs to address that situation, and he needs to go. Whereas, if the Arab leadership in the Middle East grew a pair of, excuse my French, then perhaps we wouldn't be here sitting blaming everybody else for our follies in the Middle East. We need to be taking responsibility for the poor dictators that, oppress the poor people. Not the poor dictators, but the dictators that oppress the poor people. So, that's where I'm coming from is.
Okay, someone right at the back in the corner.
I just wanted to say that basically my understanding is that actually at this point in time, anything that can happen is going to be to the detriment of the Syrian people, because both the opposition and the current regime are not really in the interests of the Syrian people, because the Syrian people and the Syrian process and culture hasn't developed enough to adopt, that's what I would argue, to adopt democracy. Hence, in any situation at this point in time is not actually going to be beneficial. Given these conditions, the most beneficial route for the Syrian people is a transition, which means not a violent change of regime, but a slow change. And that's unfortunately a fact. And if you look at the history of European revolutions, any kind of revolution which was sponsored by outside interests isn't really for the interests of the people, it's mostly for other interests. So Britain is a good example, so I'm just putting that forward, and that's something that people have to remember. Democracy is a process that takes hundreds of years, and it's not instant powder mix, you just mix it and it just works.
Okay. Okay, Mark, I'll give you 3 minutes and then 3 minutes.
Okay, the first thing is very clear is neither Assad nor Gaddafi are friends of the Libyan or neither friends of the Syrian people, or neither friends actually. They have participated since 2002, both regimes have participated in the US rendition programs, which have actually meant that Muslim brothers, people of my age or older, have actually been shipped off to Guantanamo, Bagram, or other similar prisons. Now, what we need to be clear about, of course, there's an interplay between so-called foreign interests on the one hand and inside interests. The real crux of it, though, is that the Syrian people, like the Egyptian people, like the British people, like all other people, ultimately have the right to self-determination and ultimately have the right to revolt and raise demands and put forward their demands. Now the problem is that, of course, those demands at no cost actually coincide with the kind of demands or with the kind of interests that America or the Qataris, etc., are putting forward. Because otherwise, what you would have is a situation in which the Egyptian revolution, first and foremost, was not being backed by the Obama administration until they knew that Mubarak was going to go anyways. That is why we're seeing different political forces at this moment in time fracturing around the question of Syria. Turkey, at first a very close ally of the Bashar al-Assad regime, has gone on to the other side, not because their interests coincide with the Syrian revolution, because they're making a political calculation that Assad will ultimately leave. In the same sense, Hamas, once very closely tied up with the Syrian regime, suddenly has had to leave their offices in Damascus and has made a political calculation in putting themselves onto the same page as the Syrian revolution. Different forces outside are making political calculations of how the wind is blowing and what the balance of forces within the society is. It isn't the other way around, that these forces are influencing everything that is happening on the inside, and are thus the Syrian people are just little puppets acting in the interest of Qatar, Washington, or this person, etc. But actually the Syrian people are reshaping the political landscape.
3 minutes.
I mean, we can. I mean, what's happening, what's unraveling in the historical moment we're living is speaking much more profoundly and loudly and violently than hours of speeches that Mark and I or any of our mentors or political colleagues can make. What is going on? What is going on is regime change across the world, and we're talking about Syria and the region here today, and that's exactly what's going on. Wasn't it just over a year ago? If the Zionists committed a massacre in Palestine, it would have been on the front pages of all the newspapers, and Al Jazeera would have been running it as the first story. Israel committed a massacre only a few weeks ago for 5 days. Did you see it on any front page in the West? I didn't. Did you see Al Jazeera rolling it as the first piece? If Al Jazeera is so concerned about oppressed people and revolutions, why haven't they conducted? Because without Al Jazeera, it arguably, the so-called revolution in Tunisia and Egypt wouldn't happen. Why isn't Al Jazeera encouraging a similar Palestinian spring against the Zionist state? Why didn't Al Jazeera last August in England encourage an uprising of the poor here? You know, what? Obviously, I mean, it goes without saying. I mean, it's not hypocrisy, because hypocrisy kind of alludes to the guy didn't know and he's being hypocritical. When someone knows, it doesn't become hypocrisy. It becomes something very perfidious and underhand. On the one hand, there was something funny that George Galloway said recently, that the Friends of Syria group was first called Friends of Democratic Syria. But if you have the main supporters of Friends of Democratic Syria being Qatar and Saudi Arabia, it looks so ridiculous that here is two states who are not interested in any semblance of democracy supporting democracy in Syria. What we're seeing now is a rolling regime change by means of sanctions or by whatever means NATO can do it. And believe you and me, unfortunately, and I pray to God that I'm totally wrong on this, but there will be greater wars, and that's coming for Iran especially, that will engulf Syria, and they're softening up Syria for that attack. When the Friends of Syria group in Istanbul, to their shame, are providing millions of dollars to their so-called revolution in Syria, that's to prepare, that's to soften up Syria. So Syria is engulfed with civil war that will destabilize the state when they attack Iran. So Syria will not be a conduit for weaponry going to Hezbollah for a possible opening of conflict with the Zionist state in the eventuality of a war in Iran. That is the eyes on the prize, is knocking out Iran and all the allies in the region. And that's what has to be our priority focus if we're going to defend any semblance of justice for the Syrian people as well. Because you think when NATO takes over Syria, that is going to help justice for the Syrian people? Of course not. It will roll it back generations like it has done in Libya.
Thank you very much. Here are a couple of other tweets. I keep hearing about the rights of the Syrian people, ignoring the majority who voted for Assad's reforms. What about their rights? And then somebody else who said, Saddam attracted the majority of votes all the time. A true democrat like Assad. Let's see who else in the audience would like to talk. Someone on the left-hand side.
Well, thanks. One about Al Jazeera. Yeah, sure. Like every news outlet, they pick and choose and they select their agenda. That's nothing new. But I think that there has to be something said for the role that Al Jazeera plays just generally in terms of the story of Gaza and the West Bank. Like they give a lot of coverage to those areas of the world that other news channels in this country would never ever give. So I think we need to give credit to that. And secondly, I had a question of, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are about where will the buck stop? Will Assad go down? I've spoken to a lot of Syrians that say he will go, but it will take a long time. And others that said, it's all about time now, and other countries will eventually intervene, and it will become another Libya. So, what are your thoughts on that?
We'll come back to that. A couple more questions from the audience. Yep, someone on the right-hand side. On the right-hand side.
The Tunisian and even the Libyans were proud that their revolutions will not disintegrate into what happened in Iraq. Although I'm Iraqi and I think that it is going positively in Iraq, but still, because of the relative mayhem that happened in Iraq, the Libyans and the Tunisians wanted to distance themselves from such a scenario. In reality, Tunisia was calmer. Libya has become a fractious Somaliland-like until now. In Egypt, the head of state was asked to resign by his masters, and the military has stabilized the country. And the Egyptians are tolerating that for the sake of civil peace. You see, if a whole country disintegrates, it will not be in the interest of social justice. it will be to the destruction and to the happiness of the enemies of the Syrian people. So I really appreciate if like the propaganda and the like building of impetus should not be towards wanton like regime change without afterthought. That's why I said we should have some constructive like suggestions. For instance, if we push for reforms, if we ask Bashar al-Assad to commit himself to a gradual, not to a complete, nobody in power can let go of power. It's very dangerous. It's like you're driving a train and then let go of the steerings or of the controls. He should be asked for some meaningful reforms, gradual, but to ask him and his elite just to let go in the current international circumstances in a country which is not cohesive like Libya and Tunisia and Egypt, which they don't have as many minorities and sects, etc. This is mad because the people from the other minorities will not accept such a dramatic, complete change of regime. So come up with a solution or a suggestion short of complete, immediate change of regime. That nobody will allow it who stands with the regime. If I ask the speaker, Mark, to give us a suggestion not as dramatic, something sensible that we can understand. I come from an oppressed country and I can't understand something in the middle. Can you give us some?
Okay, great. Anyone else from the audience? I think we'll try and finish the audience participation of this round, so we'll have a couple more from the audience. Yep, go.
Yeah, about the intervention. I mean, keep on hearing about intervention. What about Russia, China, and Iran? Are they interfering in the Syrian situation? Are they not paying money to the Syrian regime? Are they not arming the Syrian regime? How could we just so openly and bluntly have double standards where it's not okay for the Syrian people that are oppressed to seek help from whoever? And soon, if their fellow brothers keep on failing them, they might even go to Israel, and don't be surprised. And then you're going to accuse them of being traitors, and they're going to accuse them of being a conspiracy. Yes, if you keep on leaving them to their fate, they will go to anyone, while these countries, Iran, Russia, and China, are arming the tyrant. This is very important. And to the lady that asked about al-Assad or the Syrian people, I think it's very simple. If you feel that the cause of the Syrian people is just, then stand by the Syrian people. From now on, it's either Assad or the Syrian people. There's no two together. It's over. For us, we moved on. And if you really believe that you want to stand by justice, you have to stand by the Syrian people, not by the policies of whatever it is. The fact that if Iran or whoever else has a higher purpose doesn't justify that because to stand with Iran against the war with America that we destroy another nation. We are a nation as well, and we deserve to live free and liberal like the rest of the world.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other points from the audience? I think this will close it. Otherwise, from the audience, we'll get the chance. Okay, final comment from the audience.
Assalamu alaikum. I want to say about Hezbollah. Everybody, we respect Hezbollah, and we can say that without democracy and freedom, Hezbollah couldn't exist in Lebanon. If Lebanon was dictatorship like Syria, Hezbollah could not exist at all. So without freedom, the Syrian people cannot liberate their country. They cannot develop the country. Freedom is the most important. And always we have concerning Quran, Allah said that He sent His messengers. The main aim of sending the messenger is for justice. So we have to consider that justice is the second after Tawheed, the most important value in Islam after Tawheed. Thank you.
I'll give you 2 minutes each first, and then we'll have a closing statement of 3 to 5 minutes each.
You know, I think this Twitter conversation is probably a bit more interesting than the speakers here, because I'm seeing too many brothers and sisters looking at the tweets, slightly disinterested in what's going on in the room. And those of you who know young people, and me being a professional youth worker, know you can't have a conversation with young people today without them just staring at their Blackberries. So I'm kind of used to it. But But to the very grave and serious point at hand that we're faced with, just to answer the sister just briefly on Al Jazeera, frankly, I mean, it's been proven the CIA give Al Jazeera a shopping list of what they want and what they don't like, and Al Jazeera puts it into effect. So I'm personally, I watch Al Jazeera to know what NATO and its allies in the region are thinking, frankly. So, and similarly, I watch the BBC to know what the British state is thinking and what they want to perpetuate. But I just bring it back to this issue. Justice cannot be delivered for the people of Syria if they're open to ally with NATO. And here we have the brother from Syria himself saying, we will go to Israel if no one else comes to our help. No, but there has been people, the people at the leadership of the Zionist state have said they will support, that they are supporting the Syrian revolution, and sorry, brother, and the revolutionary so-called in Syria have also said, like yourself, that we are willing to go to Israel. Actually, there's a phone conversation between someone in the Syrian opposition and a Zionist member of the Knesset who are discussing exactly this on YouTube. So justice, sorry? I mean, this is a nonsense. Israel is standing by Assad. They're still in. I mean, people. I mean, again, Al Qaeda and the Salafi and the Wahhabi brothers, always say that Hezbollah and Syria are the gatekeepers for the Zionist state. It's a nonsense. The only Arab regime to support all the Palestinian revolutionary groups is Syria, and the only Arab state to support the Lebanese Hezbollah is Syria as well. I bring it back to this: if we want peace and justice for the people of the region, we have to ensure that what happens in Syria, that they resolve it without outside interference. Russia, China, Iran have legitimate trade and economic and military deals with Syria. That's all halal under international law. That's all fine. I was going to say kosher, but I thought I'd use halal in this context, obviously. So that's all fine. It's illegal for other bodies to actually intervene in a hostile nature in Syria. So I think what actually Kofi Annan is trying to do with the United Nations, with this, what's going on now, is a sensible way forward, is put down your guns, talk, and start talking fundamentally and simply. And we really have to move away from conflict. No one wants their sons and daughters of themselves to go through the devastation of a civil war. And I can tell you, a civil war is the worst type of conflict. It will breed hatred for generations to come. And we really have to step away from the precipice of that and try to find our own south-south or internal resolutions to this and make sure the Gulfies, the Zionists, and the Westerners stay out of our own affairs.
Thank you very much. 3 minutes.
Yeah, I just would like to, because Sukan painted me in a corner of not taking a threat on Iran very seriously. I must restate again that I'm fundamentally opposed to Western interference in the Middle East, whether it's Syria, Iran, Iraq, etc. And Sukan knows me long enough to say that I've been an anti-war campaigner for most of my life. I want to address a few questions. It's first of all, what is happening in Egypt? Will Assad go? And ultimately, I'll finish on that. I think what you saw was in Egypt, and this links up to the Syrian revolution, is that you saw a first wave of revolution where suddenly everyone, whether you were middle class, whether you were an urban slum dweller, whether you were university students, everyone came into Tahrir Square, and in 18 days they got rid of Mubarak. Now what we're seeing is a second phase of the revolutions, and the people, such as the Muslim Brotherhood, who on one day declared themselves to be revolutionaries, are suddenly saying to people striking for social justice, go back to work, you're destroying the economy, etc. But ultimately the youth in Mohammed Mahmoud Street fighting there are continuing the fight because the SCAF, the military council, as well in conjunction with the Muslim Brotherhood, has not been able to fulfill the demands of the revolution for social justice. And in the same sense, the fate of the Syrian revolution depends on whether there can be another upsurge in Egypt, because what we're seeing happening is that the Syrian people, as well as the Libyans depended upon it, as well as the Tunisians depended upon it, on the biggest country of that region in order to drive the revolutionary energy forward. Now, one thing that I have to say to the gentleman over there and also to Sukant is that The people of Syria have the right to self-determine themselves. When Gandhi was asked in 1948, saying like, "Oh, you'll give the Indians, democracy, self-rule, and all of that, and you're not ready for it." What did Gandhi respond? Gandhi responded, "We might make mistakes, but at least it will be our own mistakes, and then we will learn from them." In the same way, we will need to say that the Syrian people should ultimately hold power. They might make mistakes, but ultimately they have the right to make these mistakes by themselves. But at the moment, we're seeing this right taken away from them. This is not some kind of Arab revolution. This is a global revolution with an Arab dialect at the moment. Because if you look at the pictures from Mohammed Mahmoud Street of the riot police, they look the same way as they do in Greece. If you look at the scenes of Aleppo, they look similar to the scenes that we see in Brixton. And so the struggle that the Syrian people are fighting over there is the same struggle against injustice and oppression that we're fighting over here.
Thank you very much. So right now we've had great audience participation, interesting tweets, and good discussion from both panelists. We're going to have a 3 to 5 minute closing argument from each, but 3 minutes from each person. 3 minutes, I've been told. 3 minutes from each person. Please stick to the 3 minutes. And after that, we'll have the audience voting on which side they fall. Okay. Yes, there is a vote at the end. Okay, Sukan, 3 minutes.
I thought things are resolved by consensus. No. Okay, I'm going to end up sounding more controversial than I was earlier. I think, and I'm going to put it to you as something to think about and to mull over, I'm going to put it to you that the Arab Spring was actually concocted by the intelligence services of the NATO countries in alliance with the Gulf Cooperation countries, right? Now, this sounds very controversial to you, but why is Al Jazeera being the vanguard of the revolution in Tunisia and Egypt and in Syria? Why aren't they being the vanguard of the revolution in the Gulf? Because they are Gulfies themselves, obviously. And who do the Gulfies serve? They serve their American and British masters. I think what happened was that the West and the allies in the regions thought we want to conduct regime change against our historical enemies in the region, and that's Gaddafi and Assad and Ahmadinejad and Hezbollah. How can we conduct this while having popular support? Because we've alienated everyone because of Palestine and Iraq. So if we go with just the kind of arrogant regime change that we've done before, we're going to continuously alienate. So let's bring on certain historical allies of ours, i.e. the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafis, including Al-Qaeda. Now, even the West have said, Al-Qaeda united now with the West and NATO in Libya and Syria, it's all come out in the open. So I think what happened was they've more or less engineered. Now, that's not to say, and I emphasize this is not to say there's actually real things happening in Egypt and in Tunisia which has brought people out on the streets. Yes, it has. But bringing people out on the streets doesn't change the political status quo. What changes the political status quo is political interest using the people in the streets then to effect change. So can we say in Tunisia and Egypt things have really improved for people beyond having hundreds of candidates that you can put one cross next to at voting once every 4 years? No, we can't say anything has particularly improved for them. But what Tunisia and Egypt facilitated for NATO was a successful regime change operation and a military blitzkrieg off Libya for 7 months. They couldn't have gotten away with bombing Libya without knocking out Egypt and Tunisia first. The sum total of the Arab Spring is to bring to political power Sunni chauvinists in the region and Gulfi hegemony and Turkish hegemony and NATO hegemony in the region. That is the sum total. And again, I emphasize, I'm not saying there's actual real contradictions going on in all of these countries. Yes, they are. But the sum total of the Arab Spring has been this. Go back to Obama's speech that he made after winning the presidency in Cairo. The blueprint for what they were going to actually implement in Egypt was he actually stated it very clearly. Go back to that speech and things will become a lot clearer. The Arab Spring is actually the Arab Spring clean for NATO in the region.
Thank you. Mark,
Okay.
3 minutes.
Yeah, I just wanted to really emphasize that the Syrian revolt actually strengthens the anti-imperialist fight, and actually strengthens the very fight against Israel, the state of Israel, as well as against the United States of America, because seeing people, supposedly backward peoples of Syria, supposedly backward peoples of Egypt, who had no idea of democracy, going out and showing in full force their kind of people power, their kind of power that they have been withheld from for such a long time, actually opens up a totally different discussion about what the Arab Spring is about. Because the Arab Spring hasn't only inspired people across the Arab world and Arab and Muslim world and North Africa, it ultimately has triggered off a rebellion inside the belly of the beast itself by Occupy Wall Street. If you look at the tactics that Occupy Wall Street uses, and you look at what happened at Tahrir Square, it is very similar, even though on a much smaller scale. We need to go back to the fact that Bashar al-Assad and the Assad regime never has been, never is, and never will be a friend of the Syrian people, not a friend of the anti-imperialist struggle. In 1976, they crushed the PLO and the Lebanese resistance movement. In 1982, they did the same, and they will do it. Time and time again. We need to stand with those children in Dera who were scrawling slogans onto the wall. We need to stand with those mutinied soldiers who are fighting in the streets of Aleppo. We need to stand with those students who can no longer win bread for their families due to the economic crisis that is unfolding even more rapidly in Syria. It is a struggle between the oppressed and the oppressors, and we need to be fundamentally opposed to Western intervention, and that is primarily what we're fighting for in this country. But we also need to proclaim victory to the Arab Revolution and victory for and foremost to the Syrian Revolution.
Okay, thank you.
At least one vote.
Okay, now's the time for the vote.
Secret ballot.
No secret ballot. No secret ballots. We can get you guys to close your eyes if you want. No, okay. Okay, so we'll start from Sukan's side. Who supports Sukan's argument? Ooh, interesting.
He's won.
Standing on the fence here.
That's just not democracy, though, is it?
Sometimes you lose, sometimes you win.
That's why I said consensus is better.
Okay, and now Mark's side. Okay, I don't know if there's really much needed to count.
Not much to count. Oh.
What are the numbers, Mohammed?
Sukan got 27.
27?
Mark got 22.
Ooh. Huh? Okay, so just for summary's sake, 27 on Sukan's side, 22 on Mark's side.